So then what does it take to actually be in one of these spaces? And the times that we are able to get there, do we know exactly why it is that we were able to get there and what led up to it and how we can reliably enter these spaces more often? Well, they've been studying this for quite a while. I've been doing a lot of training at a group called the Flow Research Collective, which is an assortment of neuroscientists, PhDs in psychology, athletes, and high-performance trainers have been researching the state of flow for a few decades now, and that's sitting on top of the work of the man who's considered to be the father of flow, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote a book, interestingly called Flow, where he talks about the science of optimal experience. So what does it take to get in one of these spaces? Well, there's several factors, and without going into all of them, we're going to start off with the factors that have the biggest impact the first. And one of the most important factors is that a person who is entering a flow state has a low cognitive load. And what that basically means is that that person has very little on their mind. Their mind is sort of in a blank state. They're free of distractions. They aren't feeling overwhelmed by the world around them. And very similar to a computer, humans have a certain amount of working memory that we process things. And if a person has too much stuff on their working memory, they have a much harder time concentrating and certainly have a harder time accessing the deep flow, high productivity zones. It don't be like if you're on a computer and you opened up lots and lots of windows and then the computer's trying to process everything in all of these windows. Eventually the computer is going to slow down. And the same thing happens with a person. So the real art to this is how do we empty our working memory, our cognitive load, and how do we reduce that as low as possible, as often as possible? And there's a lot of different things that tend to consume a person's cognitive load. Have you ever had the experience where maybe there's a lot going on, multiple projects, maybe some stress, maybe a trip coming up, and there's so many things on your mind that it's like hard to actually focus on what's in front of you? Or maybe even had the experience that somebody else, you can just tell there's so much on their mind, they're not totally with you. They probably have a really high amount of cognitive load. And it seems today that people have more cognitive load than ever. People are less present than ever. They did a study, I don't have it in front of me, but where they measured the rate of people being hospitalized while texting, while walking into a wall. Apparently from 2000 to 2012, that number doubled. Then from 2012 until 2020, it tripled. So the rate of hospitalizations, people walking into a wall while texting, is sadly on the rise. Anyway, so have you ever had the experience of having so much on your mind and then decided, hey, you know what? I'm just going to take a break and I'm going to write every single thing down. And we're just writing and we're writing and we're writing and we're building this list. And then I've done this myself. In fact, the first time I did this, I had this surreal, unbelievable experience of how much connectedness and how much freedom I felt right after I had gotten everything out of my mind and out onto a list. So the real art to this is how do we dump our brains as effectively as possible, and how do we keep them low of all this stuff, all this life noise that happens? So people have been working on this for long periods of time, and the system that people use to manage this is referred to as an existence system. So like with that large piece of paper that I wrote everything down on, that is now my existence system. That's now the system I'm using to make sure that my brain no longer has to hold on to these things, so I'm blank and I'm totally clear. Other systems include things like calendars. Now, some people could try to memorize all of their meetings and when they're meeting a friend for coffee and what time that wedding started and all of that. But again, if we were to do that, that would consume lots of cognitive load, lots of neuroprocessing. We tend to experience higher degrees of stress, don't feel our best, have a hard time accessing flow, and don't perform nearly as highly as we could. So various types of existence systems have been brought into the mix in order to help reduce cognitive load, but unfortunately, it can be very challenging to effectively manage some of these systems. In the piece of paper example that I had when I first started using this, I wrote everything down on my piece of paper. I think it actually took up 2 sheets, so I have like maybe a sheet and a half of paper. And then I now need to make sure that I reliably continue to look at this piece of paper in order for my cognitive load to remain minimized or to remain at zero. If I were to write a bunch of things down on a piece of paper and then stop looking at the paper, my brain subconsciously figures that out and starts clawing these things back into my working memory and starts adding to cognitive load. So the ideal system is one where things come out of our brain and then they reemerge back into our awareness exactly at the right time and in a reliable way so that our brain doesn't have to keep latching onto this. Now, one of the biggest challenges, and which is one of the other things that is required to enter a deep flow state, is referred to as a low level of excess neuroprocessing. And so what does that mean? Neuroprocessing is any time that our brain has to make a decision. It looks at a sign and do we go left or do we go right? It looks at a screen, which thing do I click on the screen? I go into a car and which lane should I get into? Every single decision that our brain has to make requires thinking and requires energy. And unfortunately, in the world that we live in today, a lot of the way that we're interacting with technology is burning us to the ground from a neuroprocessing standpoint. Anytime we pull up a screen and there's lots of stuff on the screen, it takes a lot of energy to decide which thing not to look at. Pop-up ads, two-step verification, cookie notifications on a website. All of that starts burning through neuroprocessing. And one of the experiences that people have, and a lot of the reason that people feel the need to go on vacations, is because their brain is literally burnt out by technology from a neuroprocessing standpoint. So where the challenge really comes in then is how do we create an existence system that we can reliably reduce our cognitive load, take everything out of our mind, put it into an existence system, and then have that system be managed without creating a lot of excess neuroprocessing. Now, that is one of the unfortunate trade-offs that people are having to make, and very often they're not conscious to it. For example, let's say that somebody is in sales and they're networking and they meet 3 great people at a party. Very rarely are they getting into their cab ride at the end of the party, opening up their Salesforce CRM and meticulously taking notes. And why isn't that person doing that? Well, one might say that, well, they're being lazy, and any good salesperson should be taking notes on the people they met. But it's actually a little bit more than that. What happens is that person's actually balancing their remaining energy. Perhaps they're on a ride on their way to another event, and they need to be focused and sharp for the next people that they're going to go and meet. And navigating through, typing in a password, adding tags, all of what's involved in keeping track of these people that they just met starts to burn away energy. And so people are making the subconscious choice between, I'm going to conserve neuroprocessing power and be okay with having some level of cognitive load. Or maybe I only have to remember 3 or 4 things. It's not really worth pulling out my phone, opening up my app, typing that in there, or pulling out my piece of paper. I used to actually have a notebook. I would walk around doing this, and I tried to take it around as many places as possible, and unfortunately it became hideously unpractical. But the ideal system is one in which we can empty our cognitive load as easily as possible and with as little neuroprocessing friction as we can possibly get away with, and then also managing that system in a way that we are not further burning our brains out. I mean, how many people love dealing with their Salesforce? I've been working on this company for a while. I've talked to a lot of people. I so far haven't found one person that loves logging into Salesforce. Why is it? Is it because Salesforce is evil and bad, or they're not creating good things for people? I actually believe it's that the way that the system is designed creates lots of neuroprocessing. Same thing with email. We're going to get into email a little bit later on, but I believe that email is the absolute worst thing imaginable for somebody trying to enter flow state. It's really bad from a neuroprocessing standpoint. It requires a lot of cognitive load. The things that arise in an email, many of them we don't need to pay attention to, and the things that we do need to pay attention to, they're in varying shapes and sizes, and they usually don't flow well with one another. So we're going to talk a little bit more about email going forward, but as a high level, we want to have low cognitive load all of the time. We want to conserve and protect our neuroprocessing power because nobody has unlimited neuroprocessing. Nobody has unlimited brain power. And we're going to get these 2 things handled really well because the extent to which we manage them allows us to be more productive in all the other areas in life and also not to drop the ball on the things that we were doing. So those are the 2 main things that we're going to start with. And then the last one we'll get to in the next video.